My garden. I have lived a long life, and at this point, I'm not sure if I'll ever die. Throughout my life, I've completed countless huge projects. I also have many hobbies, but probably gardening is my favorite. I started gardening first by just chucking some seeds into a hole and seeing what happened. Most of my first gardens failed miserably. Sometimes nothing would sprout, and other times the soil would poison and kill anything in it. Through trial and error, my gardening improved, and my gardens would last longer and longer. The gardens were, in a sense, growing me rather than me growing them. Once I felt like I had a good handle on how to garden, I decided to take a week out of my busy schedule and build a massive garden. It would be my largest garden ever. I spent the first day looking for the perfect plot of land that had just the right amount of sunshine. The land was void of any plants, and this was good. I evenly spread out soil, making sure to add the necessary nutrients for the seedlings that I would plant. I erected barriers around the plot to protect the area from anything that might harm or damage the crops. The second and third days, I planned where each crop would lay in relation to the other crops and carefully chose crops that would complement each other. On the fourth day, I selected hundreds of variety of seeds to plant. For a garden, this would be the largest I had ever created. But as for projects, not involving gardens that is, this certainly wasn't my largest project, so I was confident the garden would be a success. From the beginning of the project, I made sure the garden had proper sunlight, but my prior experience taught me that if I wanted a successful garden, water was just as important as the sun. So on the fifth day, I built elaborate irrigation systems to make sure the plants could get the proper hydration they needed to grow. After the irrigation systems were complete, I finally planted the seeds. It took all day and night. I spent my sixth and final day shaping some leftover rocks into separators for some of the crops. At this point, I was really just trying to make the garden as beautiful as possible. I was exhausted. This was a lot of work to do alone. I think most people might not even believe me if I told them I built it. I took extensive notes on how I built the garden, and even wrote down some short stories that I thought up as I mindlessly dropped thousands of seeds one by one into holes. I plan to eventually publish a book of these stories. I hope it can inspire other gardeners like myself. After 6 days building this master garden, it was finally done. And although the seeds I had planted wouldn't be sprouting for quite some time, I could easily imagine what it would look like once everything had sprouted and matured. It was practically paradise. One of my most impressive feats for sure. But, like I said, at this point none of the seeds had sprouted. I spent most of the next day sipping lemonade while sitting on a ledge overlooking the garden and taking occasional naps. I was pleased. I couldn't wait to see what would become of my garden, but I had to get back to my other ongoing projects. I neglected the garden for much longer than I intended, but finally, after many, many years, I visited the garden. I was disappointed. I was disappointed to see that many of my original crops had spoiled. I would have to practically start over again. I picked a couple samplings of each type of plant that hadn't yet spoiled and carefully laid them side by side in a box a friend had made me. I then diverted some of the irrigation to flush out the entire remaining crops that had spoiled. Once the flooded out garden was again dry, I replanted the plants I had saved. Again, I would have to wait for the crops to grow back and spread. After another few years, again more than I planned, I wanted to check the garden. But I was pretty busy with my other projects, so I sent my son to visit the garden and remove any weeds he might find. You can imagine my dismay when I heard that while my son was removing weeds, he was pricked by a thorn and bled to death. I felt quite betrayed by the garden. How could my beautiful creation be a part of the death of my only son? Luckily for me, it turns out the news of his death was premature, and in just a few days, he had made a complete recovery. Many more years passed before I had time to visit the garden. I hadn't even thought of the garden for more years than you can probably count. Once I finally visited the garden, I was surprised to hear voices coming from the blades of grass that had spread well beyond the original garden. This was certainly an unexpected turn of events. They called out my name, but I knew none of theirs. How they knew my name is quite a mystery, as I never told them. The blades of grass asked me to assist in removing weeds that encroached in their space. Dandelions also called out my name, asking that I help their seed fly far. But from the vast spread of dandelions in all corners of the garden, I think perhaps they didn't need my help. I was most surprised by the trees. They constantly called out my name, thanking me for the return of leaves to their branches after winter. This was quite strange because I certainly had no part in their leaves returning. It seems that every single plant in the garden knew of me. Some called me by a different name, and some even denied my existence or ignored me completely. And although I never answered even one of the requests from the billions of plants, many of the plants were certain I had, and this seemed to make them happy. But there were others who realized that I hadn't answered, and this made them miserable. Others blamed me for the years where the lack of rainfall left them dry, or when other plants grew taller than them. Honestly, I never planned to be this involved with the garden, but I was proud, and I still am proud of my creation. I'll still check back every so often, perhaps. Maybe one day, in between my other projects, I can even respond to some of their requests. But for now, they are on their own.